The Duke's Unworthy Love. She stood in the center of the Ashford drawing room, wearing a borrowed dress 2 seasons old, trembling as the Dowager Duchess circled her like a hawk appraising wounded prey. And when the old woman finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. My grandson may be blinded by whatever spell you've cast, but I see you clearly, a governess daughter with dirt beneath her fingernails and desperation in her eyes. You are unworthy of the Ashford name, unworthy of our legacy, and most certainly unworthy of him. The words struck Eleanor Hartley like physical blows, each one confirming every fear she'd harbored since the Duke of Ashford had looked at her across a rain-soaked garden and spoken the 3 words that had shattered her carefully constructed walls. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain that she had never asked for his attention, never encouraged his affections. But before she could speak, the drawing room doors burst open with such force that the portraits on the walls seemed to shudder. And there he stood, Alexander Ashford, Duke of Ashford, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, his cravat undone and his dark hair falling across his forehead. And he looked not at his grandmother, but at Eleanor, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. Alexander, the Dowager said, her voice sharp as cut glass, you were not expected until tomorrow. He stepped into the room, his riding boots leaving muddy prints on the pristine Persian carpet, and Eleanor watched his grandmother's face tighten with disapproval. But Alexander didn't spare her a glance. He moved past his mother, who sat rigid on the settee, past his younger sister Charlotte, who watched with wide eyes, past his uncle Lord Pemberton, who stood by the fireplace with arms crossed, until he stood directly before Eleanor. "What did they say to you?" His voice was rough, breathless from riding. Eleanor couldn't answer. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't come. She had known this day would arrive, the day his family would make clear what she had always understood in her bones. She was Eleanor Hartley, daughter of a governess and a country vicar who died penniless. She had no dowry, no connections, no beauty that could compensate for her lack of breeding. She had only her education, her competence as a lady's companion to his sister, and a heart that had betrayed her by falling in love with a man so far above her station that the very idea was laughable. "Alexander, step away from that girl this instant!" The Dowager's command cracked through the air. He didn't move. "What did you say to her?" "Only what needed to be said." His grandmother lifted her chin. "That she is unworthy of you, unworthy of this family, unworthy of the Ashford legacy. I will not watch you throw away everything your father built, everything I've protected, for a passing infatuation with a woman who has nothing to recommend her but a pleasing face and the cunning to attach herself to your sister's household." The words hung in the air like poison. Eleanor felt the familiar burn of shame rising through her chest, the same shame that had followed her through every drawing room she'd entered at Charlotte's side, every social gathering where other young ladies whispered behind their fans about the companion who'd forgotten her place. "Is that what you think?" Alexander's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "That she's cunning? That she attached herself to us?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Eleanor Hartley is the most honest person I've ever known. She speaks truth when everyone else offers pretty lies. She sees people, truly sees them, Not their titles or their wealth or their usefulness. When father died and I couldn't sleep for weeks, couldn't eat, couldn't face another day of condolences from people who wanted something from me. Do you know who sat with me in the library at 3 in the morning? Not you, grandmother. Not you, mother. Eleanor. She didn't offer platitudes or try to manage my grief. She simply sat with me and read poetry until dawn came. She asked nothing. She expected nothing. His mother, the Duchess Margaret, finally spoke. "Alexander, your grief was exploited. She saved my life!" The words exploded from him with such force that everyone in the room flinched. I stood on the North Tower balcony one night last winter, looked down at the stones below, and thought how simple it would be to step over the edge, to stop feeling, to stop disappointing everyone. And Eleanor found me there. She didn't try to talk me down with logical arguments about duty or family obligation. She stood beside me and said, "If you jump, I jump. Because a world that breaks someone like you isn't a world I want to live in either." Then she took my hand and we stood there together until the sun rose. Eleanor closed her eyes. She'd never spoken of that night, had hoped he wouldn't either. The memory of it lived in her chest like a coal, warm and dangerous, and too precious to examine in daylight. "That," Charlotte said softly from her position on the settee, "is not the story of a cunning woman. That's the story of someone who loves him." "Charlotte, be silent," the dowager snapped. But Charlotte stood, her pretty face set with unusual determination. "No, grandmother, I won't be silent. Not about this." She moved to stand beside Eleanor, and the gesture made Eleanor's eyes sting with unshed tears. "Eleanor has been my companion for 3 years. She's taught me Latin and philosophy and how to think beyond what society dictates. She's never once tried to elevate herself through me. In fact, she's done the opposite. She's hidden in corners at balls, refused invitations to events where she might be noticed, always insisted she was merely staff and not family. When Lord Hartwick pursued me last season, she was the one who discovered he was already secretly married. She could have said nothing and let me marry a bigamist. Imagine the scandal that would have brought to our name. But she told me immediately, even knowing it would make me cry for weeks. That's not cunning, that's integrity. "The girl has done her job adequately," Lord Pemberton said dismissively. "That doesn't make her suitable to be a duchess." "Then what does?" Alexander turned to face his uncle. "Bloodline? Eleanor's father was the youngest son of a baron. Yes, he was disinherited for marrying for love, but the blood is there. Money? I have enough for both of us. Beauty? Look at her. Really look at her. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Eleanor felt heat flood her face. She wasn't beautiful. She'd always known this. She was too tall, too angular, her features too strong, her hair too dark and unruly. She had none of the delicate prettiness that was prized in young ladies. "Social graces?" Alexander continued. "She speaks 4 languages fluently. She can discuss philosophy, literature, art, politics. She plays the pianoforte beautifully. She dances." He stopped, and something shifted in his expression, became softer. "God, the way she dances, like music made visible." "Enough!" The dowager's voice cut through his litany like a blade. "You're infatuated. You're grieving your father still and seeking comfort in inappropriate places. This will pass, Alexander. It always does." "You're wrong." He turned back to Eleanor, and the look in his eyes made her knees weak. "I've been in love with you since the day you arrived. Charlotte had just dismissed her 3rd companion in as many months, remember? Mother was frantic. And you walked into the morning room wearing that awful gray dress with your hair pulled back so severely I thought you must be trying to make yourself invisible. Charlotte tested you immediately. Do you remember what she said?" Eleanor nodded silently. She remembered every detail of that day. She said, "I don't need another simpering fool who'll let me behave like a spoiled child. If you can't challenge me, there's no point in you staying." Alexander smiled at the memory. "And you looked at her, 15 years old and radiating hostility, and you said, 'Good. I don't need another spoiled child who mistakes cruelty for personality. If you can't be civil, there's no point in me staying.' Then you turned around and walked out." Charlotte laughed softly. "I chased after you into the hallway and begged you to come back. No one had ever spoken to me that way before." "I was standing in the doorway," Alexander said. "I watched the whole thing, and I thought, who is this woman who refuses to be diminished? I wanted to know everything about you. I wanted to make you smile. I wanted to be someone worthy of standing beside you." "You're a duke," Eleanor finally found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "I'm no one." "No," the word was fierce. "You're Eleanor Hartley. You're the woman who sat with me in my darkest hour. You're the woman who taught my sister that her mind is as valuable as her face. You're the woman who runs this household more efficiently than any steward we've ever employed. Yes, I've noticed how you've reorganized the accounts, improved staff morale, reduced waste. You're the woman who feeds stray cats in the garden when you think no one's watching. You're the woman who cries during sunset because you find the beauty of the world overwhelming. You're the woman I love with every breath in my body." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the room like a vow. "And if my family believes you're unworthy, then I must be unworthy too. Because everything good in me, everything I want to become, exists because of you." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel every eye in the room fixed on them. "Alexander," his mother began, her voice gentler now, almost pleading. "Think of the scandal. Think of what society will say." "Let them say it." He reached out and took Eleanor's hand, the first time he'd touched her in front of his family, the first acknowledgement that she was more to him than merely his sister's companion. His fingers were warm, solid, real. "I spent the last year trying to be the duke everyone expected. I attended every social function. I considered every eligible young lady. I did my duty, and I was miserable, hollow, going through motions because it was what was expected. Then, 3 months ago, I came home early from the Pemberton ball and found Eleanor in the music room playing Chopin. She didn't know I was there. She was playing for herself, lost in the music, and the expression on her face." His voice roughened. "She looked the way I wanted to feel, alive, present, unguarded, and I realized I'd spent my entire life performing for others, while she knew how to simply be." Eleanor remembered that night. She'd thought herself alone in the house, had allowed herself the luxury of playing the pieces she loved rather than the simple melodies Charlotte practiced. She'd never known he was there, listening in the shadows. "I made a decision that night," Alexander continued. "I would court her properly. I would make my intentions clear. I would give her every opportunity to refuse me if she wished, because Eleanor Hartley deserves to be chosen, not simply accepted as a consequence of my grief or loneliness." "You courted her?" the dowager demanded. "Under our roof? Without permission?" "I sought her company. I engaged her in conversation. I made sure she had flowers from the garden, her favorite, the white roses from the south wall. I asked her opinions on matters of estate business. I invited her to walk with me. I made my admiration clear." He looked at Eleanor. "And she rejected me, repeatedly. Did you know that? She told me I was confused, that I couldn't possibly want someone like her, that I needed to consider ladies of appropriate rank. She tried to protect me from my own feelings. Even when I finally told her I loved her, 2 weeks ago, in the rain, like something from one of those novels she pretends not to read, she said it was impossible. Because it is impossible. Eleanor pulled her hand from his, taking a step back. The physical distance felt necessary, like creating space between herself and a fire that would consume her. Your Grace. Don't. The word was sharp. Don't call me that. Not now, not after everything. Your Grace, she repeated, forcing steel into her voice. You are the Duke of Ashford. You have responsibilities to your family, your title, your legacy. I am the daughter of a disinherited baron's son and a governess. My mother spent her life teaching other women's children while living in their homes. My father died in debt. I have no fortune, no property, nothing to bring to a marriage, except, her voice broke despite her best efforts, except love. And love isn't enough, not in your world. Then damn my world. Alexander's words fell like stones into still water. Damn the title, damn the legacy, damn all of it if it means losing you. Alexander Ashford! The dowager rose from her chair, her face pale with fury. You will not speak such blasphemy in this house. Your father spent his life building and protecting the Ashford name. You owe him. I owe him nothing. The rage in Alexander's voice shocked everyone into silence. He's dead. He died and left me with impossible expectations and crushing duty and the weight of centuries of aristocratic pride, and I'm suffocating under it. Every day I wake up and put on the mask of the proper duke, say the right things, make the right decisions, and every night I lie awake wondering who I actually am beneath all the requirements. Father never asked what I wanted, neither have you. None of you have ever considered that perhaps I don't want this life, this endless performance of superiority and obligation. His mother stood, moving toward him with hands outstretched. Alexander, you're overwrought. The grief is still fresh. Don't patronize me. He stepped away from her reaching hands. This isn't grief talking. This is clarity. For the first time in my life, I see clearly. I see that all the rules and expectations and traditions we hold so sacred are just chains we've agreed to wear. I see that the woman I love, the woman who makes me want to be better, kinder, more honest, is being judged unworthy by people who value bloodlines over character. And I see that if I let you dictate my choice, if I marry some appropriate lady and live the life you've planned, I will become exactly what Father was, a man who fulfilled every duty and died without ever truly living. The words seemed to physically strike his mother. She swayed slightly, and Charlotte rushed to support her. That's unfair, Margaret whispered. Your father loved us. He loved you. Did he? Alexander's voice was hollow now. The rage burned out, leaving only ash. Or did he love the idea of us, the perfect ducal family, the flawless legacy? Tell me, Mother, when was the last time Father asked about my interests, my thoughts, my dreams? When did he last sit with me and simply talk, not about estate business or social obligations, but about who I was as a person? Margaret's silence was answer enough. I don't want to be that man, Alexander said quietly. I don't want my children to stand at my grave wondering if I ever truly saw them. I don't want to wake up at 50 years old and realize I've lived someone else's life. And I don't want to lose the one person who makes me feel like myself. He turned back to Eleanor, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. You asked what would happen if I married you. You worried about scandal, about society's judgment, about whether I would regret choosing you. Let me tell you what will happen. We will face opposition. People will talk. Some doors will close. My family will likely cut us off, at least temporarily. We might lose friends. We will absolutely be scrutinized and criticized. Life will be harder in some ways. Eleanor felt tears tracking down her cheeks. This was why she'd tried to refuse him, tried to protect him from exactly this moment. But Eleanor, he continued, his voice steady now, certain, we will also wake up every morning next to someone who truly knows us. We will build a life based on honesty rather than expectation. We will have conversations that matter, silences that comfort, small moments of joy that no title or fortune can purchase. We will dance in the rain. We will read poetry at midnight. We will create something real. He moved closer until only inches separated them. Eleanor could smell the rain on him, the leather and horse, and something uniquely Alexander. She could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the slight scar on his jaw from a childhood fall Charlotte had once told her about. I would rather have 1 year of true happiness with you, he said softly, so quietly that perhaps only she could hear, than 50 years of appropriate misery without you. You are not unworthy of me. If anything, I am desperately unworthy of you. But I'm selfish enough to want you anyway, to fight for you, to stand here in front of my family and risk everything for the chance that you might love me back. I do, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. God help me, I do love you. I've tried not to. I've told myself 1,000 times that it's foolish, impossible, that it can only end in pain. But I love you anyway. I love the way you listen when people speak, really listen, as if their words matter. I love that you're kind to servants and strangers. I love that you read philosophy and actually think about what it means. I love that when you laugh, really laugh, not the polite chuckle you give at social functions, your whole face transforms. I love that you care, deeply and genuinely, even when caring makes you vulnerable. I love you, Alexander Ashford, and it's the most terrifying feeling I've ever known. The room erupted. His mother gasped. His uncle made a sound of disgust. The dowager began speaking rapidly, her words a torrent of objection and command. But Alexander was smiling. For the first time since entering the room, he was truly smiling. And the joy in his expression was so pure that Eleanor couldn't help but smile back through her tears. Then marry me. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Eleanor Hartley, will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that you made the right choice? Will you dance with me in ballrooms and kitchens and gardens? Will you challenge me when I'm being ridiculous and support me when I'm struggling? Will you build a life with me that's ours, not society's, not my family's, but truly ours? Alexander, you cannot. His grandmother began. I can. He didn't look away from Eleanor. I'm the Duke of Ashford. I can do whatever I damn well please. The question is, will she have me? Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him. Not the title or the wealth or the impossible dream of being a duchess. Just Alexander. The man who'd sat with her in libraries. The man who'd admitted his darkest thoughts on a tower balcony. The man who was willing to face his family's fury and society's censure for a chance at happiness. She thought of her mother, who'd given up everything to marry for love, who died in a cottage working as a governess, poor but never once regretting her choice. Her mother had always said that a life lived authentically, even if difficult, was better than a comfortable life built on lies. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice stronger now. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed was entirely inappropriate for a ducal drawing room. Alexander pulled her against him, his hands framing her face, and kissed her with a desperation that spoke of months of restraint finally broken. Eleanor forgot where they were, forgot the scandalized audience, forgot everything except the feeling of his mouth on hers and the certainty that this, finally, was where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, the dowager was on her feet, her face white with rage. "If you do this," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you will not be welcome in this house. I will not acknowledge this woman as Duchess. I will see that every door in London closes to you." Alexander kept his arm around Eleanor's waist, holding her close. "Then I suppose we'll have to find new doors to walk through. You'll be disinherited." "No, he won't," Lord Pemberton said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. He'd been silent through most of the confrontation, watching with an unreadable expression. Now he moved away from the fireplace, coming to stand before Alexander and Eleanor. "The title and entailed properties cannot be removed. That's established law. Alexander is Duke of Ashford until his death, regardless of whom he marries. You can refuse to acknowledge the marriage socially, Mother, but you cannot unmake it legally." The dowager turned her fury on her son. "You would support this madness? I would support honesty." Pemberton looked at Alexander with something like respect. "Your grandson just stood before us and spoke the truth about father, about the weight of expectations and the cost of performance. He said things I've thought for decades but never had the courage to voice. I spent my life being the spare, the one who would inherit if Alexander died, the one who was always in the background, always secondary. I know what it's like to be defined entirely by family obligation." He turned to Eleanor. "If my nephew has found someone who makes him feel seen, truly seen, then he'd be a fool to let her go for the sake of others' approval." "Thank you, Uncle," Alexander said quietly. Charlotte jumped up from the settee. "I think it's wonderful. Eleanor will be my sister. Actually my sister, not just my companion. We can—" She stopped, her enthusiasm dimming. "Unless you'll send her away now. Will you go to live somewhere else?" "We'll have to discuss that," Alexander said. "The estates need managing. But perhaps," he looked down at Eleanor, "perhaps we could spend more time at Blackwood Manor, the smaller estate in Cornwall, away from London society, at least at first, while things settle." Eleanor nodded. Blackwood Manor. She'd heard of it, but never seen it. A supposedly beautiful estate by the sea, far from the judgmental eyes of the ton. "Running away," the dowager said coldly. "How typical." "Not running away," Alexander corrected. "Choosing our battles. I'll fulfill my duties to the title. I'll manage the estates, attend Parliament when required, maintain the properties, but I'll do it on my terms, with my wife at my side. Society will adjust or it won't. I find I no longer care." His mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You truly love her? This isn't some act of rebellion against your father's memory?" Alexander looked at Eleanor, and the tenderness in his gaze made her heart ache. "I truly love her. She makes me want to be the man I think father hoped I could be. Not the perfect aristocrat, but someone of genuine character and integrity. Someone worthy of being loved in return." Margaret's face crumpled. She sat down heavily, and for a moment she looked small and old and frightened. "He did love you," she said quietly. "Your father. He wasn't good at showing it, but he did. He used to watch you sleep when you were small, had stand in the nursery doorway and just look at you, and sometimes I'd see tears in his eyes. He wanted so much for you. Perhaps too much. Perhaps he loaded you down with expectations because he didn't know how else to show that he cared." The anger seemed to drain from Alexander. He moved to kneel before his mother, still holding Eleanor's hand, bringing her with him. "I know, Mother. I do know. And I'm not trying to destroy what he built. I'm just trying to live in a way that honors both his legacy and my own truth. Can you understand that?" Margaret looked at their joined hands, at Eleanor's tear-stained face, at her son's desperate hope. Finally, she reached out and placed her hand over theirs. "Your father married me because it was expected," she said softly. "Our families arranged it. We were both very young. I don't think either of us had a choice in the matter. Not really. We learned to be content. We had respect, partnership, shared goals. But love?" She shook her head. "Perhaps what you're choosing is better. Harder, certainly. More complicated, but perhaps more honest." "You're not forbidding it?" Alexander asked carefully. "I couldn't if I tried. You're 28 years old and a duke. You make your own decisions." She looked at Eleanor directly for the first time. "Will you be good to him? Will you stand beside him through the difficulties ahead? Because there will be difficulties, make no mistake. Some of our friends will cut you. Some invitations will stop coming. People will say cruel things." Eleanor found her voice. "Your Grace, I have spent my entire life being beneath notice or beneath consideration. I've been the poor relation, the hired companion, the girl without prospects. I know what it is to be judged and found wanting. If anything, I'm better prepared for social censure than your son is." She squeezed Alexander's hand. "But I promise you this, I will stand beside him. I will support him. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of the trust he's placed in me. Not because I want to be a duchess, I never wanted that, but because I love him. Because he deserves someone in his life who chooses him for himself, not his title." Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then, surprising everyone, she smiled slightly. "You have courage, I'll give you that. Most young women would be swooning or weeping by now. You're standing here making vows and promises like you're already taking wedding vows." "I meant every word," Eleanor said firmly. "I believe you did." Margaret looked at her son. "Very well. I won't stand in your way. But, Alexander, you must give me time. Time to adjust to this. Time to determine how we navigate this socially. Promise me you won't rush into marriage tomorrow in some fit of romantic defiance." "We'll wait," Alexander agreed. "A month? 2? Long enough for the banns to be read properly, for Eleanor to have time to prepare, for the family to adjust." 3 months, the dowager said sharply from her position by the window. Everyone had almost forgotten she was there. "If you're going to do this, do it properly. Let the girl have a proper wedding, a proper trousseau. Let society have time to grow accustomed to the idea. 3 months, Alexander. That's my condition for maintaining any relationship with you." Alexander looked at Eleanor. "What do you think?" She considered. 3 months felt like an eternity, but it also felt like wisdom. Time to be certain. Time for tempers to cool. Time to prepare for the life ahead. 3 months, she agreed. Then it settled. Alexander stood, bringing Eleanor up with him. "We'll be married in 3 months. Here at Ashford Hall, if you'll permit it. If not, we'll marry in the village church." The dowager's jaw tightened, but she nodded stiffly. "Here, despite everything, you're still family. The wedding will be here." Charlotte let out a small cheer, then clapped her hand over her mouth. "Sorry, but I'm excited. Can I help plan it? Please? I promise I'll be helpful and not demanding." "You can help," Eleanor said, smiling at the girl who'd become more than an employer, had become a true friend. "I'll need all the help I can get." "Well," Lord Pemberton said, moving toward the door, "I believe this calls for brandy, or possibly several brandies. Alexander, join me in the study. We should discuss the practical matters, settlements, property arrangements, all the tedious but necessary details." "Go," Eleanor said softly to Alexander. "I'll be fine here." He hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her alone with his family. but she gave him a gentle push toward the door. "Go. Your uncle is right. There are things that need to be discussed." After the men left, an awkward silence fell over the room. Eleanor stood in the center of the Persian carpet, still in her borrowed dress, acutely aware that, despite Alexander's declaration, nothing fundamental had changed. She was still the poor relation, still the one who didn't belong. Margaret was the first to speak. "Sit, Eleanor, please. We need to talk, the women of this family." Eleanor sat carefully on the edge of a chair. Charlotte immediately came to sit beside her, reaching for her hand in a gesture of solidarity. The dowager remained by the window, her back to the room. "I will not pretend to be happy about this," she said without turning. "I wanted Alexander to marry Lady Beatrice Worthington. She has impeccable bloodlines, a substantial dowry, connections to 3 royal houses. She would have been perfect." "She would have been miserable," Charlotte said quietly. "Lady Beatrice is in love with Lord Hartwell. Everyone knows it, except her parents, who refuse the match because Hartwell only has a vice-consul." The dowager turned sharply. "How do you know this?" Charlotte shrugged. "I pay attention. I watch people at balls and dinners. Lady Beatrice looks at Hartwell the way—" she glanced at Eleanor, "the way Alexander looks at Eleanor, like he's the sun and she's a flower growing toward light." "Romantic nonsense," the dowager muttered, but with less conviction than before. Margaret leaned forward. "Eleanor, I need to know, did you set out to catch my son? Please be honest. There will be no judgment now. The decision is made. But I need to understand." Eleanor met her gaze directly. "No, Your Grace. I spent the first year of my employment here actively avoiding him. I knew he was grieving his father. I knew he was under tremendous pressure. I thought if I kept to myself, kept to my role as Charlotte's companion, I could simply do my job and fade into the background as I'd always done." "What changed?" Margaret asked. "He noticed me anyway." Eleanor's voice softened at the memory. "Last spring, Charlotte and I were in the rose garden. She was reading poetry aloud, that phase where she was obsessed with Wordsworth, and I was mending some of her dresses. Alexander came walking through and stopped to listen. Charlotte invited him to sit with us. He did. We spent the afternoon there, the 3 of us, just reading and talking and laughing. It was—" she struggled to find words. "It was the first time I'd felt like a person rather than a servant in years. He treated me as an equal. He asked my opinions on the poems. He debated interpretations with me. He made me feel like what I thought mattered." "It happened gradually after that," Charlotte added. "Eleanor would try to excuse herself when Alexander came around, but had asked her to stay. He'd seek her out to discuss things. I watched it develop over months. Neither of them planned it. It just happened." Margaret nodded slowly. "I believe you, both of you. I've been watching too, though perhaps not as carefully as I should have been." "I noticed Alexander was happier, more engaged. I attributed it to his grief fading, to him finally accepting his father's death. I didn't realize—" she paused. "I didn't realize he'd found someone who brought him back to life." "He did the same for me," Eleanor admitted quietly. "I'd spent so long being invisible, being no one. With Alexander, I felt seen, valued, not for what I could provide or what role I could fulfill, but simply for being myself." The dowager turned from the window. "3 months," she said abruptly. "You have 3 months to prove yourself, girl. 3 months to learn everything you need to know about being a duchess. 3 months to prepare for a life of scrutiny and criticism. I will not help you. That would be dishonest. But I won't hinder you either. If you're going to do this, do it properly." Eleanor stood, drawing herself up to her full height. "I appreciate the time, Your Grace, and I won't waste it. But I want to be clear. I'm not trying to become someone else. I'm not going to pretend to be a high-born lady who somehow earned this position. I'm Eleanor Hartley, daughter of a disinherited baron's son and a governess. I'll be the best duchess I can be, but I'll do it as myself." Something flickered in the dowager's eyes. Respect, perhaps? Or at least acknowledgement. "Then perhaps you'll do, after all. False humility would have been worse than pride. At least you're honest." "It's all I know how to be," Eleanor said simply. Charlotte squeezed her hand. "This is going to be wonderful. Unconventional, certainly. Probably scandalous, but wonderful." Eleanor looked at this girl, 17 years old and privileged beyond measure, who'd somehow become one of her dearest friends. "I hope you're right." "I am," Charlotte said with the confidence of youth. "Alexander is different with you, better, more himself. That has to count for something." In the study, Alexander sat across from his uncle, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. Lord Pemberton had poured them both drinks, then settled into his chair with a sigh. "You've created quite the situation," Pemberton said mildly. "I know. Your grandmother will make your life difficult. She's not one to forgive easily. I know that, too." Pemberton studied him. "Do you love her, truly? Or is this some rebellion against the life you've inherited?" "I love her," Alexander said without hesitation, "more than I thought possible to love anyone. She makes me want to be better than I am, braver, more honest. When I'm with her, I remember who I wanted to be, before the weight of the title crushed that out of me." "Your father felt that weight too," Pemberton said quietly. "He never spoke of it, but I knew. My older brother, carrying the burden of the dukedom, never allowed to be simply himself. He married your mother because it was expected. He raised you to fulfill expectations. He died still performing the role, never having lived freely." He paused. "I used to pity him. I was glad to be the spare, to have relative freedom. But now I wonder if he would have envied you this moment. The courage to choose." Alexander looked up sharply. "You think he would have approved?" "I think he would have been terrified for you and proud of you in equal measure." Pemberton took a sip of his brandy. "Now, let's discuss practicalities. The marriage settlement. You'll need to provide for Eleanor appropriately. I suggest you settle Blackwood Manor on her as part of her jointure, along with a substantial annual income. That way, if anything happens to you, she'll be protected." "Nothing will happen to me," Alexander said automatically. "Nevertheless, she's entering this marriage with nothing. You must ensure she's protected." Pemberton pulled out paper and pen. "Let's make a list of what needs to be done in the next 3 months. The settlements, the trousseau, though I imagine Eleanor will resist extravagance there. The wedding itself. The announcement to society. Preparing Blackwood Manor if that's where you plan to live initially." They worked through the details for over an hour, Pemberton's practical mind organizing what seemed like an overwhelming amount of tasks into a manageable timeline. By the time they finished, darkness had fallen outside the study windows. "One more thing," Pemberton said as Alexander stood to leave. "The staff. You'll need to address them directly. Some will object to serving a woman of Eleanor's background. Better to know now who will stay and who will leave." "I'll speak to them tomorrow," Alexander agreed. "Uncle, thank you. For understanding. For helping." Pemberton waved a hand dismissively. "I'm not as hidebound as your grandmother. Besides, Miss Hartley has managed Charlotte brilliantly these past years. Anyone who can turn that wild child into a reasonable young woman has my respect." He smiled. "Now go. I'm sure you're eager to find your betrothed." Eleanor was in the library, standing by the window watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. She'd escaped there after an hour of stilted conversation in the drawing room, needing space to process everything that had happened. She heard him before she saw him. his footsteps on the wooden floor, the particular cadence of his walk. Then his arms were around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She leaned back against him. "I don't know. It doesn't feel real. This morning I was a lady's companion. Tonight I'm engaged to a duke. Tomorrow I'll wake up and wonder if I dreamed it all." "It's real." He turned her in his arms to face him. "Very real. But we'll face it together." "Your grandmother hates me." "She'll come around, eventually." "Maybe." He smiled ruefully. "All right, she might never truly accept you, but she won't be able to deny you're my wife. Your mother looked at me like a puzzle she couldn't solve." Mother has always been practical. "She'll judge you by your actions, not your background. Give her time." Eleanor touched his face gently. "And Charlotte thinks this is a romantic fairy tale." "Charlotte is 17 and has spent too much time reading novels," Alexander said, but fondly. "She'll learn that real love is more complicated than stories make it seem." He paused. "Are you regretting your answer?" "No." The word came out more vehemently than she'd intended. "No, never. I'm frightened, yes. Uncertain about whether I can do this, whether I can be what you need me to be. But I don't regret saying yes. I couldn't have said anything else, not when you stood there and risked everything." "I wasn't risking anything that mattered," he said. "Material things, social standing, my family's approval, those things are important, but they're not essential. You are essential. The possibility of a life with you is essential. Everything else is just noise." She kissed him then, there in the library where so many of their quiet conversations had taken place. It was slower than the desperate kiss in the drawing room, more tender, full of promise and hope, and just a hint of fear. When they parted, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "3 months," he whispered. "We can survive 3 months, can't we?" "We can survive anything," Eleanor said, "as long as we survive it together." They stood there in the darkening library, holding each other, while outside the window, the stars continued their ancient dance across the sky, indifferent to human concerns about rank and propriety, caring nothing for titles or bloodlines, shining with equal brilliance on dukes and governesses alike. And somewhere in the house, the Dowager Duchess sat alone in her chambers, looking at a portrait of her late husband, and wondering if he would have understood his grandson's choice, if he would have recognized that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not to fulfill expectations, but to exceed them in unexpected ways. Charlotte lay in her bed, already planning the wedding in her mind, imagining Eleanor as a sister in truth rather than just in affection. Margaret sat at her writing desk, composing a letter to her sister, trying to explain what had happened, trying to understand it herself. And Lord Pemberton stood at his window with his own glass of brandy, toasting the empty night and murmuring, "Good luck, my boy. You'll need it." The next 3 months would be unlike anything any of them had experienced before. There would be battles fought in drawing rooms and ballrooms, victories and defeats measured in cutting remarks and turned backs. Society would judge, family would pressure, doubt would creep in during long nights. But in that moment, in the library, holding each other, Alexander and Eleanor had something more powerful than approval or acceptance or social standing. They had each other, and they had the courage to believe that might be enough. The clock on the mantel struck 9, and somewhere in the house a door closed, and the future waited, uncertain, daunting, and filled with possibility. The second month of their engagement brought the first true test of their resolve. Lady Ashford, as Eleanor was now being called despite not yet being married, received her first invitation to a society event. Lady Pemberton, Alexander's aunt by marriage, was hosting a small dinner party. "Only 20 guests. Nothing overwhelming," she promised. Eleanor stood in Charlotte's dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. The dress was beautiful, the first truly fine dress she'd ever owned. Deep sapphire silk that brought out the color of her eyes, with delicate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. Charlotte had insisted on supervising the creation personally, working with the modiste to design something that was both fashionable and suited to Eleanor's coloring and figure. "You look like a duchess," Charlotte said, circling her with an approving expression. "No, you look like yourself, only in clothing worthy of you. There's a difference." Eleanor touched the silk nervously. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up, like at any moment someone will realize I don't belong in something this fine." "That's nonsense." Charlotte came to stand beside her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You've spent years wearing gray and brown and pretending to be invisible. This is who you actually are when you're not hiding. Alexander saw it from the beginning. Now everyone else will too. Or they'll see a jumped-up commoner in a silk dress, playing at being something she's not. Then they're fools." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "Besides, you won't be alone. Alexander will be beside you. I'll be there. Even Mother is coming, which is her way of showing support even if she doesn't say it directly." Eleanor took a deep breath. "You're right. I'm being ridiculous. It's just a dinner party. A dinner party where at least half the guests will be watching you like hawks, waiting for you to use the wrong fork or address someone incorrectly," Charlotte said cheerfully. "No pressure. You're not helping. I'm being honest. You appreciate honesty." Charlotte grinned. "But truly, you'll be fine. You know all the rules. You've observed society for years. You speak multiple languages and can discuss art, literature, philosophy, politics. You're more educated than most of the ladies who'll be there. The only difference is they were born to their positions while you earned yours." There was a knock at the door, and Alexander entered. He stopped when he saw Eleanor, his expression transforming into something she couldn't quite name, but that made warmth flood through her chest. "You look—" He seemed at a loss for words. "I don't have adequate language. Beautiful is insufficient. Radiant, perhaps. Or simply," he crossed the room to her, "simply yourself, but in a way the world can finally see." Charlotte made a gagging sound. "Oh, Lord, the poetry!" "I'm leaving before you two start quoting Keats at each other. I'll be downstairs." She swept out, leaving them alone. Alexander took Eleanor's hands. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I embarrass you? What if I prove your grandmother right, that I'm unworthy of this position?" "Impossible." His certainty steadied her. "Eleanor, you couldn't embarrass me if you tried. You could show up in your old gray companion dress and speak plainly to everyone there, and I'd still be proud to have you at my side. This," he gestured to her dress, her carefully arranged hair, "this is lovely, but it's not why I love you. I love you for your mind, your compassion, your integrity. Everything else is just decoration." She leaned into him, careful not to crush her dress. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "I don't. Half the time I'm terrified I'll say something wrong, and you'll realize you've made a terrible mistake agreeing to marry me." He pulled back to look at her. "We're both frightened, both uncertain, but we're frightened and uncertain together. That has to count for something." The dinner party was held at the Pemberton London townhouse, a stately building in Mayfair that managed to be both impressive and oddly welcoming. Lady Pemberton greeted them at the door with a warm smile that seemed genuine. "Miss Hartley," she said, taking Eleanor's hands. "How lovely to see you in a proper setting finally. I've heard so much about you from Charlotte, all of it glowing, I assure you. Welcome." Eleanor murmured her thanks, trying to read the older woman's expression. Lady Pemberton had always been kind during the few times they'd encountered each other, but that was before she was engaged to the Duke, before she became a subject of gossip. The drawing room held perhaps 15 people already, drinks in hand, conversations flowing. Eleanor felt the moment they noticed her. the subtle shift in attention, the barely perceptible pause in dialogue. Then Lady Pemberton was guiding her forward, making introductions, and Eleanor found herself shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with people who weeks ago wouldn't have spared her a glance. Lady Beatrice Worthington was there. Of course she was. Tall, blonde, beautiful in the classical sense, with perfect posture and an expression of polite interest that revealed nothing. "Miss Hartley," Lady Beatrice said when they were introduced, "or should I say Lady Ashford? I confess I'm unclear on the proper form of address for one who isn't yet married but is engaged to a duke." Eleanor caught the slight edge in the words but refused to rise to it. "Miss Hartley is perfectly appropriate, Lady Beatrice. The title will come soon enough." "Indeed it will," Lady Beatrice smiled, and there was something in that smile, not quite malice, but not quite kindness either. "You must be very excited. It's quite the elevation in circumstances." "I'm marrying a man I love," Eleanor said evenly. "The circumstances are secondary." How romantic! The words could have been sincere or mocking. Eleanor couldn't tell. Though, of course, the circumstances do come with the man, don't they? One can hardly separate the Duke of Ashford from his title and fortune. Alexander appeared at Eleanor's elbow. "Lady Beatrice, how lovely to see you. I hope you're well." Lady Beatrice's expression softened slightly. "Quite well, Your Grace, though I confess I was surprised by your engagement announcement. We had all thought—" She stopped herself. "But I suppose expectations often go unfulfilled." "Indeed," Alexander said pleasantly. "I'm told you're to be congratulated as well. I heard Lord Hartwell has finally secured his father's permission to court you properly." Eleanor watched with fascination as Lady Beatrice's carefully controlled expression cracked, revealing genuine surprise and something that might have been joy. "You heard about that?" "Charlotte mentioned it. She's quite the observer of society." Alexander smiled. "Hartwell is a good man. I hope your families can come to terms." "Thank you, Your Grace." Lady Beatrice looked at him with new eyes, as if seeing him differently. "That's kind of you to say." She glanced at Eleanor. "Miss Hartley, I apologize. That was ungracious of me earlier. I had certain expectations that proved incorrect, and I'm afraid I let disappointment color my manners." Eleanor felt some of her defensive tension ease. "I understand, Lady Beatrice, truly, and I hope things work out with Lord Hartwell. Charlotte speaks very highly of him." "He's wonderful," Lady Beatrice said, and the transformation in her face was remarkable. The cold politeness melted away, revealing someone younger and more vulnerable. "Completely wrong for me, according to my parents, but right in every way that matters. I suppose we have that in common, don't we? Choosing our hearts over our family's preferences." "I suppose we do," Eleanor agreed. After Lady Beatrice moved away, Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Well, that was less terrible than it could have been. "See," Alexander said quietly, "not everyone will be hostile. Some will understand. Some will even admire your courage." He paused. "Though I suspect there will be others who are less generous." He was right. As dinner progressed, Eleanor became aware of Lady Hartwick, a formidable dowager in her 70s who commanded attention without raising her voice, watching her with undisguised interest. When they were finally introduced after dinner, Lady Hartwick didn't bother with pleasantries. "So, you're the girl who's caused such a stir," she said bluntly. "Companion turned Duchess, quite the accomplishment." Eleanor met her gaze steadily. "I'm marrying the Duke of Ashford, Lady Hartwick. The title is a consequence, not an accomplishment." Lady Hartwick studied her through narrowed eyes. "Pretty speech, but we both know the title is rather more significant than you're pretending." "You will be one of the most powerful women in England, whether you sought that or not." "I'm aware of the responsibility," Eleanor said carefully. "Are you? Because I've seen dozens of young women married to powerful men, and most of them had no idea what they were taking on until it was too late. The scrutiny, the expectations, the way every choice you make will be dissected and criticized, the pressure to produce heirs, the necessity of managing massive households and complex social obligations, the loneliness of living in a world where everyone wants something from you, but few truly see you. Eleanor felt the weight of those words. With respect, Lady Hartwick, I've spent my entire adult life being invisible, being overlooked and underestimated. I understand loneliness and the difficulty of navigating social structures from a position of disadvantage. At least as a duchess, I'll have the power to actually affect change rather than simply enduring circumstances. Lady Hartwick's expression shifted, something that might have been approval flickering in her eyes. You've thought about this? Every day since Alexander proposed. Good, because the ones who float into marriage with romantic notions and no practical understanding are the ones who end up miserable. Lady Hartwick leaned closer. I'm going to give you some advice, girl, whether you want it or not. Don't try to be what you think a duchess should be. Half these ladies, she gestured to the room at large, are performing roles they learned from their mothers and grandmothers, following rules that made sense a century ago but are ridiculous now. You have an opportunity they never had. Use that. Eleanor felt something in her chest loosen. Thank you, Lady Hartwick. That's genuinely helpful. I'm old, and I don't have time to be anything but honest. Lady Hartwick straightened. Now, I'll be watching you, Miss Hartley. I want to see what you do with this unprecedented situation. Don't disappoint me. As she walked away, Eleanor felt Alexander's hand find hers. That went better than expected, he murmured. Did it? Eleanor was still processing the conversation. Lady Hartwick terrifies most people. The fact that she gave you advice rather than cutting you down means she's decided you're worth her time. He squeezed her hand. You're doing beautifully. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and introductions. Some people were coolly polite, their disapproval clear even unspoken. Others were openly curious, asking pointed questions about her background that bordered on rude. But a surprising number were kind, or at least willing to give her a chance. As they rode home in the carriage, Charlotte chattering excitedly about various interactions she'd observed, Eleanor leaned against Alexander's shoulder and felt the tension of the evening finally release. One event down, she said quietly. How many more to survive? Hundreds, probably. His arm came around her. But we don't have to attend all of them. We'll choose carefully. Attend what's necessary, skip what's merely expected. Create our own social circle rather than trying to fit into theirs. That will cause talk. Let it. He kissed the top of her head. I'd rather be talked about for being unconventional than miserable from trying to conform. In the dim light of the carriage, with London passing by outside the windows and Charlotte's happy chatter filling the space, Eleanor allowed herself to hope. Maybe they could actually do this. Maybe love and determination and a willingness to rewrite the rules would be enough. Maybe they could prove everyone wrong. The third month brought unexpected allies. Lady Pemberton began calling on Eleanor regularly, ostensibly to help with wedding preparations, but actually to provide instruction on the practical aspects of running a ducal household. She did it with such tact and kindness that Eleanor never felt patronized, only supported. The key to managing staff, Lady Pemberton said one afternoon as they reviewed household accounts in the morning room, is respect. You'll have servants who've been with the family longer than you've been alive. Some will resent your authority. But if you treat them with genuine respect, listen to their expertise, acknowledge that they know their roles better than you do, you'll earn their loyalty. Eleanor made notes in the small book she'd started keeping. And the ones who won't accept me regardless? Let them go. Lady Pemberton's voice was firm. It sounds harsh, but a household can't function with division among the staff. Alexander will need to make it clear that disrespecting you is equivalent to disrespecting him. Those who can't abide by that should be given generous references and allowed to find positions elsewhere. That seems mercenary. It's practical. You're not trying to win a popularity contest, Eleanor. You're trying to build a functional household that serves your family's needs. Kindness is important, but so are clear boundaries and expectations. These conversations, combined with the history and etiquette lessons Margaret had begun providing, slowly transformed Eleanor's understanding of what she was taking on. It wasn't just about learning to be socially acceptable. It was about learning to manage a complex organization, make decisions that affect dozens of people's livelihoods, represent the family in public and private spheres. It was, she realized, similar to what she'd been doing as Charlotte's companion, only on a much larger scale. She'd been managing schedules, coordinating with staff, handling correspondence, making decisions about household matters. She'd just been doing it invisibly, without acknowledgement or authority. The realization was empowering. She wasn't completely unprepared. She had skills, experience, intelligence. She just needed to learn to apply them in this new context. Alexander found her one evening in the estate office, surrounded by ledgers and account books, her hair falling from its pins as she concentrated on understanding the financial structure of the various properties. "What are you doing?" he asked, leaning in the doorway. "Learning." She didn't look up from the columns of numbers. "Your estate manager, Mr. Thornton, has been incredibly patient in explaining everything. Did you know the Cornish property has been operating at a loss for 3 years? The tenant farmers are struggling with the rocky soil and declining fish stocks, but there's potential for tourism, wealthy people wanting to holiday by the sea. If we invested in improving some of the cottages, creating proper accommodations." "Eleanor," he crossed the room to her, "it's past midnight. You should be sleeping." "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about everything I don't know, everything I need to learn." She finally looked at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "What if I fail, Alexander? What if I become Duchess and I'm terrible at it? What if I ruin everything you've built?" He pulled her from the chair into his arms. "You won't. And even if you made mistakes, which you will, because we all do, you wouldn't ruin anything. This isn't about perfection. It's about trying, about caring, about bringing your whole self to the role rather than just performing what's expected." "Lady Hartwick said I could define the role for myself," Eleanor said against his chest. "But I'm not sure what that means. How do I be a duchess authentically when I don't even know what authentic looks like for me in this context?" "You start by being Eleanor," he said simply. "You care about people, actually care, not just perform appropriate concern. You notice things others miss. You think deeply about problems and creative solutions. You're practical but compassionate. Those qualities will make you an excellent duchess, even if you do things differently than predecessors." She pulled back to look at him. "You really believe that?" "I absolutely believe that." He kissed her forehead. "Now, come, leave the ledgers. Tomorrow you can return to learning how to manage estates. Tonight you need rest." As she let him lead her from the office, Eleanor glanced back at the scattered papers, the tangible evidence of the life she was preparing to enter. The enormity of it still frightened her. But for the first time, she felt a flicker of excitement, too. She could do this. It would be hard, uncomfortable, full of challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But she could do it. Not by becoming someone else, but by being herself in this new role. The week before the wedding, the Dowager summoned Eleanor to her private sitting room. Eleanor went with trepidation, unsure what to expect. The old woman had been coldly polite but distant throughout the engagement. Never openly hostile, but never warm either. "Sit," the Dowager commanded when Eleanor entered. Eleanor sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. The Dowager studied her for a long moment. "You're still here," she finally said. "I'm sorry? I expected you to flee, to realize what you were taking on and run away before the wedding. Most sensible women would have." The Dowager's voice was flat, unreadable. "But you didn't. You stayed. You've attended every social event, survived every cutting remark, studied household management and estate finances like they're subjects for examination. Why?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. "Because I love him, and because running away when things are difficult isn't who I want to be." Love. The Dowager made it sound like a child's fantasy. Love fades, girl. It transforms into something else. Partnership, obligation, habit, resentment. What then? "Then I'll have partnership, obligation, and habit," Eleanor said steadily. "And hopefully not resentment, because I'll go into this with my eyes open, knowing exactly what I'm choosing." The Dowager's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You have spine, I'll give you that. When you first arrived here as Charlotte's companion, I thought you'd be like the others, simpering and obsequious, desperate to please. But you weren't. You did your job well, but you didn't grovel. I appreciated that, even if I didn't show it." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she remained silent.